Hey everybody, this is Final Film Productions back with another video. Today I want to talk about a subject that's not talked about that often. It's the sequel that never got made, the sequel to the Thomas Jane Punisher movie from 2004. The sequel was well on its way to being made, that would star Thomas Jane, that would be directed by the original director Jonathan Hensleigh, and would focus more and give us more of the Punisher than we got in the first movie. The first movie was more of an origin story, and the Punisher didn't become the Punisher till really near the end of the movie. I'm a big fan of the 2004 Punisher movie. Wasn't as big a fan of the 2008 movie that became Punisher 2, but not really Punisher 2. Punisher Warzone, which starred Ray Stevenson, was directed by Alexei Alexander, was more of a reboot, was more of a reimagining, a lot more campy, a lot more cartoony and violent, and it became the result of all the rewrites, all the trouble in trying to get the Thomas Jane Punisher 2 movie made. And in this video I hope to go through and talk about what that Punisher 2 movie starring Thomas Jane could have been, what it should have been maybe in my opinion, and there's all different people that wanted different ideas, and unfortunately we didn't get to see Jonathan Hensleigh's Punisher. We didn't get to see maybe something more in the line of what Thomas Jane wanted, and we even have Walter Hill was primed to make the movie at one point as well, which could have been also a really good movie. Ultimately we got Punisher Warzone, and then we went on and we got the Punisher Netflix show, and he also starred in the Daredevil show. But I'll talk about those things at another time. In this video I want to talk about the Punisher 2 with Thomas Jane that didn't get made. Essentially, when the Punisher 2004 was released, I mean, it was made for something around the mark of 30 million. It didn't do that great in its cinematic release. I think it was around the time Kill Bill 2 was out. I could be mistaken on that, but my memory serves me right. Kill Bill 2 was out that time, and it did a lot better at the box office. But I think the Punisher, the Thomas Jane one, was well received by a lot of people. Critics didn't like it that much. I personally really enjoyed the kind of no CGI, straight up action movie. A lot of stunt work, a lot of violence. Thomas Jane was terrific in it. John Travolta was the typical smarmy villain that he can do so well. And I think hopefully in another video I'll go through all the things I really liked about the Punisher 2004, but I really did like it. It's one of my favorite movies. So the sequel was definitely something I was very excited about, and I followed, even at that stage, back then I did follow it quite closely, and ultimately we didn't get this movie, but there was definitely a lot of ideas going around. Jonathan Hensleigh directed Punisher 2004. He wanted to come back. He wrote a script that I'll go through in a moment, which sounds a hell of a lot better than what we got in Warzone. But ultimately for Jonathan Hensleigh, he didn't get to make this movie, and his script, I'm not sure where the arguments lay, but his script never got made. The Jonathan Hensleigh movie that didn't get made, the script that he had is I couldn't find the actual script myself, but the website moviehole.net, they have a review on it. They didn't seem to like it. They seemed to think that the Punisher Warzone was going to be a much better script that would turn into a much better movie. That ultimately, in my opinion, Punisher Warzone turned out to be a disaster. So, moviehole.net, I'm not sure if they still stand by that. But the Jonathan Hensleigh's script starts in the desert. I'm not exactly sure where they're going to film this. I think there was talk of Texas or something like that. But it says it opens with Frank in the desert hunting down two criminals, two scumbag brothers who have just robbed an armored car. And movieHole.net mentions that there was some sort of high noon style showdown, which is a kind of would be in keeping with what happened in The Punisher 2004, where the Punisher sort of does a quick draw several times, and this was kind of a reference to Hensleigh. Liked a lot of the westerns, the Sergio Leone movies, those sort of Clint Eastwood movies, and he kind of tried to reference those movies at times. Whether that was a good thing or not, I think it kind of didn't work in the 2004 movie. I think it's the sort of thing you have to use very sparingly, and it shouldn't feel forced or awkward. The movieHole.net says then it's the script then cuts to New York, where mobsters are having a get together, and Frank drives in with his Punisher mobile. Is this a reference to maybe the battle van being in the movie? The battle van is something from the Punisher comics and cartoon, where it's kind of like a souped up van that is all weaponry and cool stuff that the Punisher drives around and kind of takes out criminals. But essentially he bursts into this get together of mobsters, and he mows them down with a chain fed minigun, and he turns all the gangsters into mush, except for one of them, Billy Russo, who we all know turns into Jigsaw. And Jigsaw did end up being in Punisher Warzone, and he was definitely from the early scripts of Jonathan Hensleigh and Thomas Jane, all their interviews straight after Punisher 2004, they talked about Jigsaw being in the movie. So Jigsaw seems to be the one thing that survived in the 2008 movie. And clearly Hensleigh wanted Jigsaw to be in this. Jane seemed to want it as well. And Jigsaw's kind of the Punisher's main villain. And we've seen Jigsaw in the Netflix show as well. We're still on Jonathan Hensleigh's script here. So Frank then gets in a car chase. Cops chase him. And there's a female cop, Stevie West, I think is the name of the character in this script, and they say that this is a potential love interest for Frank. That she's a big part of the script apparently, and her connection to Frank, probably chasing Frank down, is probably a big part of the movie. It says Frank has wasted all the mobsters. Billy Russo becomes the head Goomba, that's what this website says, and decides it's time to clear out the competition. Russo poses as an anonymous citizen. He calls Frank and tips him off about various shady dealings. And faster than you call lightning, Frank has dispatched the villains in question and has successfully got rid of Billy's rivals. And then Frank finds out that Billy's been using him. They have a standoff. Frank smashes Billy's face into a mirror. And I think this is the way that Billy's face gets turned into Jigsaw. And then we get the scene that ended up being in the 2008 Punisher movie, where kind of reference back to Batman, the Tim Burton Batman, where Joker looks in the mirror and sees that his face is all changed, and they do this with Jigsaw. It says then that Russo begins an all-out assault on New York. His first protocol is getting some evidence from the police that implicates him in the murder. Russo kidnaps the female cop's dad, and it references a big shootout in Walmart where Frank ambushes Russo and his gang, and they have this big shootout. And this seems to be a kind of a pretty outlandish action scene, kind of reference probably something like the Russian fight scene in the first Punisher movie. The script says that Frank's character in the script seems to be a background character and pops up here and there, but he does nothing, which I I would imagine if this is a draft script, they say, so I get the impression that that might be a little bit unfair. I think Hensleigh would ultimately have given more time to Jane's character, Frank's character. And yeah, I mean, it is possible that they would have sidelined Punisher a little bit, because we know of other, especially the Batman movies, where Batman seems to be kind of playing second fiddle to the villains, who sometimes seem more interesting. So that's an interesting point. Would the Punisher have been kind of sidelined a bit, with maybe Jigsaw getting a bit more of a role? It's hard to say. They also mention in the script review that there's a subplot tacked on with a priest who is butchering people who he thinks are sinners. And I'm not sure if that's a reference to a comic book character of a priest like this. It could be possible. Somebody could probably tell me in the comments section. And they also mentioned that there seems to be they criticize Hensleigh that he has trouble with vigilantes, and that they say that in the sequel that Punisher's actions are once again questioned and put under the microscope by Stevie's dad. That's Stevie being the female cop in the film. And this review says that these scenes are boring and pointless. I think this review, if you do find this review, is from moviehole.net. They seem to be describing a movie that I really would have enjoyed to see, and they seem to, maybe they didn't, I don't know at this time, did they know much about the Warzone script? Because I'm sure if anybody read the Warzone script, they would have thought, this sounds terrible. So this Jonathan Hensleigh movie seems to be centered around the Punisher taking down villains and all street level crime, going after really bad people, a lot of violent action scenes, Jigsaw being the origin story of Jigsaw. I do like the sound of it. I think it probably needed work, and I'm sure this being a draft script, there would have been a lot of work made in it. Ultimately Hensleigh left, and he either was pushed out, or he got tired of maybe the script not being greenlit, or maybe there was arguments between him and Jane. I don't know. There's an interview shortly after this. I'm not sure of all the time frames of all of this, where Jane says that they were looking for a different director. Ultimately, I think I would have liked to seen the Jonathan Hensleigh script being made. A lot of it sounds interesting. I think he would have made a better crack at the Jigsaw Punisher dynamic than the 2008 movie, the Alexei Alexander movie did. I think he has a good grip on kind of low budget action sequences, and I think they were saying that this they weren't going to give a big budget to this either. I think Warzone didn't get that much of a budget. I think they got even less or around that than the Punisher 2004 movie got, and it only had like a 30 million budget. So I mean, this was always going to be a tough movie to make, whoever made it. But I think Hensleigh showed that he could definitely work with a small script, even though I'm sure he would have been pulling his hair out yet again, and maybe that's the reason he didn't make this movie. There was talk of, in several of these interviews, Thomas Jane says that he wanted that they were going to film in New York, but there's several references that around 2006 that they were going to film in Louisiana, probably to stand in as New York, and so Tampa would have been used like the first movie. So I think that'd have been interesting. I don't know enough about Louisiana to know if that would have worked at all, but clearly Louisiana and Texas were shooting locations that Punisher 2 with Thomas Jane was going to be in, and I think Tampa was something that people criticized a lot, because they felt it didn't feel like a Punisher location, or a place that a Punisher movie should have been in. I think that's pretty fair. I mean, Tampa, Florida is big. There's a big difference between Tampa, Florida, and the mean streets of New York. So you know that's a pretty fair thing to come out with. But ultimately, I think I want to talk now about Thomas Jane. Thomas Jane seemed to be the driving force behind all this, especially when Hensleigh left. Thomas Jane tried to steer it in the direction that he specifically wanted, and you know he's definitely a guy that cared about the character. He's definitely a guy that didn't just storm off this without a fight, and he definitely didn't want to make a movie that he didn't believe in. And there's references here from IGN and stuff. Around 2005, 2006, after the first movie that Thomas Jane had put on 12 pounds of muscle. So he really was ready to start this movie. He was ready to get into it. And it's a pity that he never did get to make it. We know he went on to make the Dirty Laundry short movie, but I would have really wanted to see the Punisher 2 sequel that he wanted to get made. In an interview with CBR.com, Thomas Jane talked about Punisher 2. This was late 2004, so this was before Hensleigh left. Thomas Jane says they're really hot on the sequel since the DVD had sold so well. They're in the process right now of budgeting a sequel. We might have in the next 2 weeks sort of a preliminary budget, and then we'll start talking about story, then the writer, and then we'll get going. I'll be involved in story development, and he most certainly was. In all my research for this Punisher 2, it seems that Thomas Jane was really a driving force. He really wanted to get this movie made, but his intentions were to make it more like a street level, a very realistic, very dark revenge movie. He mentions films like Taxi Driver, Death Wish, not like Spider-Man that would have been out a few years previous to this. Thomas Jane says the strengths of the Punisher that I did lie in the reality that we were able to bring to the character, and the weaknesses of that Punisher I did were based on people trying to make this a comic book movie with funny characters and goofball shit that had no place in a Punisher movie. So he definitely wanted to remove all the humor and comedy parts out of it. I think Hensleigh, probably him and Hensleigh maybe locked horns in that, because I think Hensleigh wanted to have the comic book humor and references to the comic book stuff in it more. It's very hard to know. We didn't see the whole Hensleigh script. Was he trying to put more of that into the sequel? Maybe that's the reason he left. Very hard to know with a lot of this, because you're seeing bits and pieces, but definitely Jane was pushing for them to make a really dark, realistic, gritty Punisher 2, and ultimately that didn't come to be. In 2007, Thomas Jane talked about Punisher 2 again. He says the problem has always been getting a decent script. We actually have a script that's been turned in this week, and we'll have all fingers crossed. We'd love to do it. Everybody wants to do it, but we all want to make a good movie. It starts with a script. We've got to get a good script, and then we'll be ready to rock. The plan is to start Punisher 2 in June, of course. I think I said that last year. I think at this point he was starting to get fatigued at the fact that this film could never get made, and all the things that he was pushing for were kind of being sidetracked and kind of ignored. And ultimately Thomas Jane left the movie. There was on the website ain'titcoolnews.com. He sent in a big speech about why he left the Punisher 2 at that point. This was in 2007, May. Thomas Jane is quoted as saying here, "I regretfully and painfully had to pull out of Punisher 2. I can't tell you how completely broken up I am after busting my ass to the gym 4 days a week for almost 2 years, watching every character-driven action pick that any fan would ask me." He mentions several movies: Old Boy, Point Blank, Escape from New York, The Driver, The Mechanic, Road Warrior, Man on Fire, Rocky. Think about it, he says. So he mentions a lot of different stuff. He says Punisher fans are already fighting an uphill battle as it is, and I always felt it was responsibility. He said it's my responsibility to fight, and that fight for them and with them, so that Frank Castle gets the treatment he deserves. I'm sharing this with you because I know you're a fan like me and you've got your ear to the ground, and because we seem to share that same sort of taste and passion when it comes to movies and stories to get us off. What I won't do is spend months of my life sweating over a movie that I just don't believe in. I've always loved the Marvel guys and I wish them well. Meanwhile, I'll continue to search for a film that one day might stand with those that the fans have asked to watch. Sincerely, Thomas Jane. So yeah, he seemed pretty pissed off. This was 2007. That's like 3 years of rewriting scripts, writers coming in, leaving. Jonathan Hensleigh, who was the main guy driving the sequel, he left. Then we have several references to different writers coming in. Kirk Sutter, he came in 2007. He says, I'm a huge fan of the character Frank Castle as complex, torture, badass. I had a blast writing a script, working with good producers and smart execs, and made an enjoyable gig. He later went on to say that they didn't like his ideas. This is Kirk Sutter. They said that they didn't like his ideas. And ultimately his script wasn't used. He says that his script, apart from how Jigsaw became Jigsaw, none of that was used in 2008's Warzone. So you have Hensleigh gone, you have Sutter's script gone. We then get there could be more, but Collider mentions that John Dahl, the director of You Kill Me, Rounders, The Last Seduction, was going to be directing a sequel to The Punisher. This was 2007 as well. But after talking with him today at the junket, he says that he's not a part of that anymore. He says, this is John Dahl, the director. He says, I had talked to them about doing that, but I'm actually not doing it. He says, I love the idea of a kick-ass action vigilante that's got a really black sense of humor, that can throw 3 people in a trash can, light them on fire, walk away while they're screaming. That just sounded funny to me, but I wasn't sure that the script could really get there. That would have had that sense of humor. I also felt too much baggage, not in a bad way. There was just too much. I was sort of digging myself out of a hole right from the beginning. So he was trying to make it more of a kind of maybe black comedy action thing. I don't think Thomas Jane would have went for that. Thomas Jane wanted less humor. So that's your third writer. There may have been more. There's an interview in the Be More Super podcast. You should check it out with Thomas Jane. It was done this year, where Thomas Jane goes into what he wanted to do with the sequel. And this is before, this was Thomas Jane, the last attempt to get his Punisher 2 made. I believe this was 2007. This would have happened to this, but this is an interview done in 2020, and this is what Thomas Jane says. They wanted to do a sequel. We went through several writers. In fact, Rob Zombie was going to direct it at one point. We talked to Rob. We talked to lots of great writers. We hadn't found the story. No writer had cracked it. I went to Walter Hill. He's done 48 Hours, The Driver, Hard Times. He wrote Aliens, for fuck's sakes. The guy, he's a master director. If we could get Walter Hill, Thomas Jane, Punisher, what else do you want? I thought we had this in the bag. I got Walter, I pitched him the thing. He loved it. The story, we went to Lionsgate. Essentially, Walter said, I'll write it, I'll direct it, we'll get a script. And they said no. They turned down Walter Hill. For me, there was no better version. I had been talking to them about it being more gritty, what the fans responded to in the first one, and what they hadn't. Once they turned down Walter, I said, these guys don't understand what this character needs. A few weeks later, they rang me and they said they had a director writing a script and will shoot by the end of the year. What I didn't know is that they had a certain amount of money to spend by the end of the year and allocated to the Punisher movie. Thomas Jane Continues, so they were rushing the Punisher 2 into production. By the end of the year, they had hired this woman. I said, great, let me see why you hired her. They showed me her first movie, a soccer movie. I'm not saying it was a good or bad movie. I'm saying, like, what the fuck? How did you get from a kid's soccer movie to the Punisher? And I thought this was going to be a disaster, and I couldn't do it. If you want to wait and do this right, I'm all in, but I'm not going to star in it because you have money to spend, and the director suggests you don't know what kind of film you want to make. So they went ahead, they made the film, it opened to like $3 million. It tanked. I knew it would. The formula wasn't right. You need the cast, you need the right people for the right parts, whether it's writers, directors, cinematographers. Sad thing is, the head guy at Lionsgate, I saw him a while later and he wanted to apologize because we really effed it up. We should have waited. We hired the wrong people. So that's Thomas Jane talking about his exit, the reasons that he finally exited. He tried to get Walter Hill in to make The Punisher 2. Walter Hill being a guy that's used to violent action movies, who's very experienced. To me, that sounds probably like the best one of the lot. But I think definitely Hensleigh or Walter Hill would have made a damn good movie. Unfortunately, we ended up getting Punisher Warzone, which was, as Thomas Jane alluded to, was going to be something completely different that really wasn't something he was interested in, and was definitely something that way off what Jonathan Hensleigh and Walter Hill would have wanted to make. But what do you think? What do you think about these ideas? What do you think about Hensleigh's idea? What do you think about the Walter Hill Thomas Jane idea? Which one of those would you have liked to see come to life? And it'd have been interesting to see, had any of those movies been made, would it have been a success? Would they have been well liked? Would they have been well received? It's hard to know. I think ultimately, by looking at today's perception of the movies, the 2004 movie is the movie that's held up the most. It's the one that gets talked about the most. People seem to suggest 2008 Warzone would become a cult movie, and that didn't really happen. I think the 2004 movie has become the movie that's gained a following. People talk about it in a much more more positive and nostalgic way now, that that at the time people didn't seem to have the interest in it. But I think I definitely seen the past few years that people think a lot more of it. So what do you think? What do you think of? Do you regret not getting to see any of these ideas, or do you think that these ideas simply at the time weren't good enough? What's your thoughts? Let me know. Thanks for watching.